happening in their life, but it seems as though everything is the same in my life. And that is simply because on occasion we began to doubt the power of God. We say, even as that person said it, Lord, I believe, but help thou my unbelief. And that is simply because we're involved in a battle, and because of the battle that we are engaged in, on occasion we began to doubt the power and the ability of our God. But then also, as we are engaged in this warfare and as we are engaged in this battle, on occasion we feel as though we are defeated. Or yes, on occasion you feel like you've been defeated by the enemy. It seems as though he has gotten the best of you. That's when you've been sick so long and it seems as though you'll never get well. That's when it seems as though you have more bad news than you have good news. Just this morning I was talking with someone and they made the comment that when it rains, it falls. And indeed that's a true statement, because when it rains, it does pour. Because you look at your life and it sort of seems as though everything that can go wrong, it goes wrong. And sometimes it just seems as though there's no bad news, that there is no news at all. And so as a result of that, on occasion, we feel as though we've been defeated. But I want you to know that as you're going through life, that you got to understand that as a Christian, that you can't live based on how you feel. Because the truth of the matter is that you all will feel some things in life. But just because you're feeling a certain way, that doesn't mean the way life is. And so therefore, you can't go through life based on how you feel. Because the reality is that you may not feel good, but you're still doing all right. Because the truth is that you might not feel like praising him, but the Bible said that as long as you got breath in your body, that you ought to be willing to give him praise. Because your life is not based on how you feel, but rather your life is based on what you know. And so therefore, regardless of how you feel at any particular moment in time, you've got to understand that you serve a God that is still able to do exceedingly abundantly more than you can ever think or even ask. And so therefore, you can't live your life based on your feelings, because if you're living your life based on your feelings, what that is saying is that you're living in the flesh and not in the spirit. And so therefore, you got to learn not to live in the flesh, but you got to learn to live in the spirit. And the way in which you do that is not living your life based on how you feel. Also, you got to learn not to live your life based on your failures. Because the truth is that we all have failed at something. Maybe you didn't fail the class, but you failed at something. Maybe you didn't fail getting on the team, but you failed at something. And the truth is that you've been living your life and you haven't failed at anything. What that says to me is that you've been living on easy street. What that says is that you've been living your life on the low road and not the high road. That you've been living your life doing everything that is easy and nothing that is challenging. But if you're going to do anything that is challenging in life, that you got to recognize that it may not go as well as you want it to go. All of us have had some seasons in our lives where things just didn't work out. And so just because something didn't work out for you, and just because you failed at something, I want you to understand that doesn't make you a failure. That even though people might look at you strange because it didn't work out the way that you thought it would work out, just lift up your head anyhow. Don't let anybody put you down because something didn't work out the way that they thought it should work out or the way that you thought it should work out. But you just keep on going anyhow. And so therefore, don't live your life based on the fact that you have failed at anything. And then, my brothers and sisters, you ought not live your life based on fear. Many of us, we have not grown in the things of God. Not because the opportunities for growth has not come to us, but the real reason that we have not grown is because we are afraid. We are fearful to try something that we have never tried before. Fearful and afraid of what somebody gonna say or how somebody gonna respond if we give it a try. But you know what I've learned? I've learned the people that criticize you the most are those who don't do anything. And so therefore, you ought not let anybody bother you because of the fact they are critical of you trying to do something that you have never done before. Just think for a moment that if the Wright brothers, if they were afraid to fly, many of us will never know what it's like to ride in an airplane. I just think for a moment that if Henry Ford was afraid to try out his invention with a car, many of us be still riding horse and buggy. And so there comes a time where you can't let your life be dictated by fear, but that you got to rise above whatever you might be afraid of. And so as you live your life as a Christian, you ought not live your life as a failure. You ought not live your life as fear. And God knows that you ought not live your life based on your feelings. So then how should you live your life? If you are indeed a born-again child of God, then if God is real in your life, you ought to learn to live your life based on faith. The Bible still says that faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. You got to remember that Abraham received a good report of God. And he received a good report of God not because of his feelings, but he received a good report of God because of his faith. If you really want to make God happy, if you want to make God shout, if you want to make God stand up and take a look at you, you got to live by faith. The Bible said that without faith it is impossible to please God. But if you want to please God, you got to live by faith. You got to understand that God is the rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. And so every moment of your life, you ought to let faith bubble up inside of you. Even when doubt began to surface, you ought to let a little bit of faith comes into the picture. You ought to be able to raise up your voice and say, yes, I'm more than a conqueror through Jesus Christ. That I might be down 1 minute, but I know that I can get up again. That I might have seemed to have lost my song, but guess what? I'm going to sing again, and I'm going to sing stronger than I did before. So therefore, if you're going to be a Christian in Jesus Christ, you got to learn to live your life in faith, because the way in which we have victory because of our faith in Jesus Christ. And I want you to understand this morning that the reason that you have faith and have victory in Jesus is simply because of the leading of God. In other words, it is what God destined for your life. It is not what you wanted for yourself, but rather it is what God wanted for you. Because God looked at your life and God saw that you needed strength, even when you didn't understand that you needed strength. God understood that you needed something in your life when you didn't even understand what you needed or how you were going to get it. Then what God did, God looked beyond your faults, somebody said, and God saw your needs. And the Bible sums it up like this. It said that while we were yet sinners, that Jesus died for us. What that says to us, that it is all about the leading of God. It is about God's hand leading us and guiding us. And I love the way David said it. David said, Lord, lead me to a rock that is higher than I am. And then David summed it up. He said in the 23rd Psalm, he said, He leadeth me beside the still waters. And that is because in order to experience the power of God and experience the victory that we have in God, that Jesus is the answer. And so therefore you must understand that God gave us this victory simply by His leading of us. God has given us this victory simply because God loved us. Yes. Because at the end of the day, God loved all of us. God loved us even when we were unlovable. Yes. God still loved us. Yes. God loved us even when nobody else cared. God still cared. Yes. And if you don't believe that God loved you when nobody else loved you, listen to the Word of God. Come on. For the Word of God said to us that God so loved the world. That He gave us His only begotten Son. And what that says to me is that God loved me. And not only did God love me, but God also loved you. And because of the love of God, what God has done is that God has now given us the victory. And the victory that we have is tied up in Jesus Christ. Oh yes, come with me now to 1 John chapter 5. Because it is here in John chapter 5 and 1 John, we find in verse 1 that what happens when you have victory in Jesus, that you now have confidence in him. It is right there in verse 1. It says, whosoever believeth that Jesus is the Christ is born of God. In other words, that when you believe on Jesus, that you don't have to wonder about your salvation. That you don't have to wonder whether or not God is real in your life. If you have confessed him with your mouth, believed in your heart that God has raised up Jesus from the dead, you don't have to wonder about your salvation. Now you have confidence about what God has done in your life. I don't know about these folks that go around saying that I think I'm saved. Come on. I want you to know that if you're thinking about it, you need to go back. Because there's something that you ought to know. You ought to know that the Lord has brought about a change in your life. You ought to know that I once was lost, but now I'm found. I love the way the saints of old would talk about it. They would say, you can't make me doubt it. Because I know too much about it. And they were talking not about what they felt, but rather they were talking about what they know. And I want you to know that every now and then, you want to know that God is real in your life. Oh no, you can't make me doubt him. I know too much about it. And therefore, when you have been blessed by God, and God has saved your life, you then have confidence in Jesus. Whosoever believeth that Jesus is the Christ is born of God. And so therefore, when you have victory in Jesus, you have confidence in your salvation. When you have victory in Jesus, you have compassion with others. Notice what he says in verse 2. He says, by this we know that we love the children of God when we love God and keep his commandments. Now understand the commandment that 1 John is talking about. Because the first commandment, the commandment that John is talking about, is that new commandment. That commandment that Jesus gave. Come on. Jesus said that there's a new commandment that I give unto you. And he said that you love one another. Even as I have loved you. And if you don't believe that's what John was talking about, if you go into the preceding chapter, and you go to chapter 4, it is in chapter 4 that he gives us these words. He says, how can we love God whom we have not seen? Come on. And he says, and yet hate our brother that we see every day. He's letting us know that when you have the victory in Jesus, what you then know how to do, you know how to love. And I want you to know that you love because it is a requirement to love. Oh yeah, I love you not because I want to love you, but I love you because God requires that I love you. I love you not because you ask for my love, but I love you because you need my love. Because in order to get love, you got to learn to give love. And I believe that oftentimes we want everybody to love us, but yet we don't want to love anybody else. But I want you to know, in order for the love of God to be real in your life, that you got to learn to love somebody else. You got to learn to love even though you might not like them. The Bible doesn't say like them, the Bible says love them. And the Bible says love will cover a multitude of faults. And I don't know about you, but the love of God is what has covered my sins. It's not that God liked me, but it's because God loved me. It is not because I deserve God's love, but rather because God gave me his love. While I was innocent, God loved me and God died for me. And it all running cross. So therefore, you got to remember that you have victory in Jesus. And you know that you have victory when you have compassion for one another. Oh yes, you know that you have victory when you have the capacity to deal with whatever comes in your life. Come back with me, if you will, to verse 5. Because in verse 5, he talks about being an overcomer. And he begins it in verse 4. For he says, for whatsoever is born of God overcometh the world. And this is the victory that overcometh the world, even our faith. Who is he that overcometh the world? But he that believeth that Jesus is the Son of God. In other words, he's letting us know that when you have the victory in Jesus, you then have the capacity to deal with anything that comes in your life. Oh yes, when you have victory in Jesus, come on. When sickness comes, you got the capacity to deal with your sickness. When you have victory in Jesus, when troubles come in your life, you got the capacity to deal with whatever comes. When there are problems on your job, you got the capacity to deal with whatever comes your way. When there are problems in your family, you got the capacity to deal with whatever comes your way. When there are problems in the church, you got the capacity to deal with whatever comes your way. You are more than a conqueror, and you are an overcomer. And therefore you have victory in Jesus. There was a man named Blue who controlled many of the street corners in Chicago. Whatever you needed, be it drugs or prostitutes, liquor, lottery tickets, you name it, Blue had it. Blue was a mean man, and everybody knew it. People who wrongfully crossed Blue were either stabbed, they were shot, or they simply disappeared. But one day, Blue told everybody he was going to take a business trip and that he would be gone for 2 weeks. But after 2 weeks, Blue didn't return. 3 weeks passed, and guess what? There was still no Blue. 6 weeks passed, and you got it, there was no Blue. And so finally one of Blue's girls got worried, and she went looking for him. Everyone she saw, she asked, where is Blue? Has anybody seen Blue? Finally, a young brother said he had seen Blue walk down a nearby alley, turned the corner just a few minutes earlier. And so the young woman decided to check out Blue's trail. When she reached the end of the alley, she turned the corner, but all she saw was a church. And she thought, surely Blue can't be in there. But she entered anyway. And to her surprise, guess what she saw? Come on. There was Blue. And Blue was standing at the door as an usher, with his hands behind his back, white gloves on, and wearing a badge, with a smile on his face. The young girl sat down and listened to the choir sing. She heard people testify, and she even stayed long enough to listen to the sermon. When the pastor opened the doors of the church, she went up to the front. And the pastor responded by saying, "Sister, we're glad that you accepted the invitation. But please tell me, why did you come? Did you come because of the testimonies of the saints?" She responded by saying, "Rev, the testimonies were touching, but that's not why I came." The pastor said, "Well, did you come because of the choir singing?" She responded, "No, and God knows they can really sing." And so then the pastor stuck out his chest and said, "Well, maybe you came because my sermon motivated you, and you were touched by the sermon." The girl responded, "Well, Rev, God knows you can preach, but that's not why I'm here." She then turned and looked over at Blue, and she said, "I came because I wanted to meet the man who could change me. And I know that we got victory in Jesus. And so today we can celebrate the victory we have in Him. Now, indeed, victory is not a possibility. But I want you to know that victory has been assured. Victory is not just for some of us. But I want you to know that victory is for all of us. Victory is not just for Donald Trump. But I want you to know that victory is for all of us. Victory is for the rich, and victory is also for the poor. And I want you to know that I made up my mind that victory is mine. That no matter what Satan brings my way, I can still raise up my voice. And victory belongs to me. I told Satan, get thee behind me. The victory is mine. Get thee behind me. Victory is mine. I lift up my voice. I give God the praise. I give the shout. I got victory is mine. Don't live your life being defeated. Don't let Satan defeat you. But if you want to fight, tell him he got a good one. Tell him he got a good one. Because not only can I sing that I'm on the battlefield, but I put on my warfare clothes. I got my helmet of salvation. I got my sword of the Spirit. I got the breastplate of righteousness. I got my feet covered with the gospel of peace. I can sing because I'm happy. I can sing because I'm free. Because eyes on the sparrow. And he's watching after me. Oh yeah, you got the victory. And you got the victory in Jesus. And when you have that victory, it doesn't matter what comes. Because you can still raise your voice. And you can still say, but I'm more than a conqueror through Jesus Christ. You're going to win. It might get dark sometimes, but guess what? You're going to win. It might get lonely sometimes, but guess what? You're going to win. The lonely might come you out, but guess what? At the end, you're going to win. Because you are a conqueror. And you are a winner in Jesus Christ. Let us all stand. Let us all stand. If you're here this morning, you're here this morning, and I know that there are seasons in life wherein we began to think and feel as though nothing will ever get any better. When you've been sick so long, and you began to wonder whether or not I will ever feel better. But understand, this walk is not about what you feel, but it's about what you know. So if you're here this morning, you've never given your life